Startling and sad to hear those chants of lock him up yesterday from the crowd. Take pleasure in that.
It really was. There have been many traditions that have been brought about by Donald Trump and his supporters and people around him that are un-American, even fascist, the chants of lock her up. The send her back, but the lock her up about Hillary Clinton repeatedly has become a centerpiece, and that's what dictators do. They take over and then they start talking about imprisoning others, and it's un-American. It's well, here's the chant here. So that's what unfortunately has been fed into America's political system through Donald Trump, and last night it was turned against him. But again, it's un-American, and the people in the stands that were doing it last night shouldn't have done it. In fact, they have learned from Donald Trump. That's what you do to political opponents. I hope that Donald Trump, after saying that he could be facing this throughout his entire campaign, will cut it out. We'll cut it out because this is. I remember when Barack Obama was leaving office, a lot of liberals wanted George W. Bush tried by some international tribunal. I remember us saying, don't do it because it will be you on the other side of the presidency will then have to worry about retribution from the person that you follow. Yeah. And of course, you never think, Mike Barnacle, nobody ever thinks that anybody's ever going to follow them as president of the United States when they first get in. Just like Donald Trump, he's never imagined it. But live by the sword, die by the sword. And sure enough, now you have Donald Trump having Barr conduct an outrageous investigation against Barack Obama. And Donald Trump even calling the 44th president of the United States treasonous. It's like this guy is just not smart enough to figure out that what goes around comes around, and what he dishes out to others will be dished out to him. That's why everybody has to tone it down. Stop with the chants.
Oh my God!
Stop with the fascist-like tactics and the rhetoric. It's just un-American, and it's just not right.
Yeah, Joe, and if you know this, I mean, most people know this. A lot of people in this country just want the entire situation calmed down. They want the country to calm down. They want candidates to calm down. It'd be tough to have the crowd last night calm down because they were really into it, unfortunately. But I think it's important going forward, especially today as we talk about the events that occurred over the weekend, that we take the time and the thought to separate Donald Trump and whatever you feel about Donald Trump, to separate him and how he behaves and how he speaks from the actions of the Delta Force team, the special operators who flew in and conducted that mission. It's two separate things. And the best of us, the best of who we are and what we do around the world, and why so much of the world still relies on us, was in operation over the weekend.
Jonathan Lemire, you can speak to that, but also last night.
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly an American tradition to boo politicians who go to baseball games. I mean, there's a rich history of the American presidency and the American pastime. William Howard Taft was the first president to throw out a first pitch.
I remember that.
Barnacle was there. And every president since has at some point. This president has not yet, not since taking office. But he went last night. I think the people around him were hoping it could be part of the victory lap after announcing the death of al-Baghdadi earlier in the day. That, of course, was not the case. But let's remember, he's deeply unpopular in the District of Columbia itself. He only received about 4% of the vote there in 2016. Obviously, it's a little bit of a different crowd last night at the World Series. Some more out-of-towners, some more corporate types. Still, he was going to get booed, and he was. But certainly, it comes at the end of what his administration feels like was a significant watershed day for him to be able to make this announcement of the death. As Mike said, you could separate the president and your feelings towards him with what happened the day before in Syria. This was the leader of ISIS killed. This gives the president an image he thinks to put alongside President Obama's announcement of the death of Osama bin Laden. And it certainly comes at exactly the right time his people feel for him. It's an undeniable triumph to happen during the midst of the impeachment inquiry, And it allows him to defend his policy in Syria, just as so many Republican senators were critical of it.
Well, you know, Mika, we're going to get to that right now, get to the story. And obviously, just to follow up on what Jonathan said, there is a very long and rich tradition of presidents being booed at sporting events. Most of them do.
This was a little different.
But again, I speak to the lock him up chants.
Yeah.
Again, it's un-American. It started with Donald Trump. In fact, he's made it a centerpiece of his campaign rallies.
I mean, we find it sickening when it happens at his rallies. I find it kind of sickening to watch people leering at the president.
We are Americans, and we do not do that. We do not want the world hearing us chant, lock him up, to
yet he created
to this president or to any president. That's what I'm saying. Let's hope as we move forward, maybe this is one less fascist tactic he and his supporters use during Chants, that you were going to actually imprison your political opponents. So let's leave that behind and just
gets it. I don't.
We'll see if the Astros
it's possible.
are going to finish it off in Houston. I don't know if Max can pitch Game 7. Anything's possible. That's what you were telling me before we came on the show.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.